In suburban Phoenix, 43-year-old Sarah Mitchell discovered an old photograph that would unravel her entire reality. What began as spring cleaning became a journey into her past when she noticed something impossible in the background. Before we continue, drop a comment if you've ever experienced déjà vu. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The courtroom was packed that Tuesday morning in downtown Phoenix. My own siblings sat across from me, their expensive lawyers whispering strategies while they shot daggers with their eyes. For months, they had been demanding that I hand over my shares of Carter Construction, the company our father had built from nothing. They claimed I was mentally unstable, financially irresponsible, and unfit to run any part of the family business. What they didn't know was that I had been documenting everything. Every suspicious transaction, every forged signature, every illegal contract they thought they had hidden from me. The manila folder in my briefcase contained enough evidence to send them all to prison for decades. When Judge Morrison asked if I had any final evidence to present, I stood up slowly. My hands were trembling, not from fear, but from the weight of what I was about to unleash. The folder felt heavier than it should have as I approached the bench. "Your Honor," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I have one document that changes everything." As the judge opened the folder, his expression shifted from professional curiosity to shock, then to something that looked like disgust. He read for what felt like an eternity while the courtroom sat in complete silence. Finally, he looked up at me, then at my family's legal team. "I'm calling a 15-minute recess," Judge Morrison announced. "No one leaves this courtroom." That's when I saw my brother Marcus whisper something urgent to our sister Caroline. Her face went white. My other brother, David, was frantically texting someone on his phone until a bailiff told him to put it away. Somehow they knew their carefully constructed lies were about to crumble. But let me back up and tell you how we got here, because the story of how my own family tried to destroy me starts years before that dramatic courtroom moment. Carter Construction was founded by my father, Robert Carter. Dad started with nothing but a pickup truck, a toolbox, and an unshakable work ethic. By the time I was born in 1992, he had built the company into one of Arizona's most respected commercial construction firms. We specialized in schools, hospitals, and municipal buildings projects that actually mattered to the community. Growing up, I spent every summer on construction sites. While other kids were at camp or playing video games, I was learning about foundation work, electrical systems, and project management. Dad believed in hands-on education. "You can't manage what you don't understand," he would tell me, as we reviewed blueprints together. My three older siblings took different paths. Marcus, the oldest at 38, went to business school and joined the company's financial side straight out of college. Caroline, 35, became a lawyer and handled our legal affairs and contracts. David, 33, focused on sales and client relationships. I was the youngest, and unlike my siblings, I actually enjoyed the construction work itself. After graduating with a degree in civil engineering, I joined Carter Construction full-time. Dad had always planned for the company to remain in the family, with each of us eventually owning equal share. The business was thriving. We had steady contracts, loyal employees, and a reputation for quality work that spoke for itself. Everything changed when Dad suffered a massive heart attack 3 years ago. He survived, but the doctors told him he needed to step back from the daily stress of running the company. That's when the family dynamic shifted dramatically. Marcus immediately positioned himself as the natural successor, being the oldest and having an MBA. Caroline supported this, arguing that Dad needed someone with proper business credentials in charge. David went along with whatever Marcus wanted, as he always had. I disagreed. Marcus understood spreadsheets and profit margins, but he had never actually managed a construction project. He didn't understand the complexities of dealing with subcontractors, building inspectors, or the dozens of variables that could make or break a job site. The first major argument happened during a family dinner at Dad's house. Marcus had just announced his plans to modernize the company by cutting what he called unnecessary expenses. "We're spending too much on safety equipment and training," Marcus declared, spreading financial reports across the dining room table. Our competitors are underbidding us because they're cutting these corners. Those aren't corners, I said firmly. That's how we keep our workers safe and avoid lawsuits. Caroline backed Marcus up. Jessica, you're thinking emotionally, not practically. This is business. This is exactly the kind of thinking that got Miller Construction shut down last year, I countered. They cut safety costs and ended up with 3 workplace accidents and a wrongful death lawsuit that bankrupted them. Dad listened to the argument with a pained expression. The stress was clearly affecting his health, but he seemed unable to choose sides between his children. Over the following months, Marcus began making changes without consulting me. He switched to cheaper safety equipment suppliers, reduced training programs, and started bidding on projects with unrealistically tight margins. When I objected, he would override my concerns by getting Caroline and David to vote with him. The first signs of real trouble came 6 months after Dad's heart attack. I noticed discrepancies in our financial reports. Payments to certain subcontractors seemed inflated. Supply costs for materials didn't match the actual quantities we were using on job sites. When I brought these concerns to Marcus, he dismissed them as clerical errors. You're not an accountant, Jess. Leave the financial management to people who understand it. But I kept digging. Late nights in the office, cross-referencing invoices with delivery receipts and actual usage report. What I found made my stomach turn. Marcus had been creating fake subcontractor companies and billing the business for work that was never performed. He was also marking up material costs and pocketing the difference. Caroline was facilitating this by creating shell companies and false contracts. David was bringing in clients and overcharging them for services while promising them Marcus would deliver quality work at competitive prices. The scheme was sophisticated and had been going on for almost 2 years. They were systematically bleeding the company dry, while making it look like we were more profitable than ever on paper. When I confronted Marcus with the evidence, he didn't deny it. Instead, he made an offer that revealed just how far they had planned to head. You have 2 choices, Jessica, he said calmly in his office. You can keep quiet about this, sell us your shares for a fair price, and walk away, or you can make this difficult for everyone, including Dad. You're stealing from our own company, I said. Barely containing my anger, I'm maximizing efficiency and profit. Marcus corrected, something you've never understood. We're offering you $2 million for your 25% stake. That's generous considering the company's actual value. The company was worth at least $12 million, making my share worth $3 million minimum, but the number wasn't the issue. The principle was, and if I refuse, Caroline spoke up from behind Marcus's desk, then we'll be forced to take legal action. We have documentation showing a pattern of erratic behavior on your part, emotional outbursts, poor decision-making, interference with normal business operations. I realized then that they had been setting me up for months. Every disagreement, every time I had questioned their decisions, they had been building a case to paint me as unstable and unfit to be a business partner. You're going to claim I'm mentally incompetent. We're going to present evidence that you're not capable of making sound business decisions, David added, for the good of the company and Dad's legacy. That night, I went home to my small apartment and made a decision that would change everything. If they wanted to play dirty, I would play smarter. I started documenting everything systematically: bank records, email communications, recorded conversations, where Arizona law allowed single-party consent. I traced the fake companies, found the hidden accounts, and discovered the full scope of their fraud. What I found was worse than I had imagined. They weren't just stealing from Carter Construction. They were also defrauding clients, submitting false insurance claims, and using company resources for personal expenses. The total amount exceeded $4 million. More disturbing was what they planned to do now. Once they forced me out and gained control of the company, they intended to sell it to a larger corporation for a massive profit, leaving Dad with nothing and putting all our employees out of work. But they had made one critical error. In their arrogance, they had documented their crimes in emails and text messages they thought I would never see. Caroline had been sloppy with her legal paperwork. Marcus had left digital trails in the financial record. David had bragged about their schemes to potential clients, not knowing some of those conversations were being recorded for quality assurance. The file I eventually handed to Judge Morrison contained irrefutable proof of wire fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy, and racketeering. Under federal law, their actions constituted organized criminal activity. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off. As I sat in that courtroom, watching my siblings whisper nervously to their lawyers, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and determination. These were the people I had grown up with, shared holidays with, looked up to as role models, but they had chosen greed over family, profit over principles. When Judge Morrison returned from his recess, he was accompanied by FBI agents and local police officers. The folder I had given him hadn't just contained evidence of civil wrongdoing. It had documented federal crimes that demanded immediate law enforcement intervention. My family's demand for everything was about to cost them their freedom. To understand how my own siblings became my enemies, you need to know who we were before greed poisoned everything. The Carter family wasn't always broken. There was a time when we actually functioned as a team, when Dad's dream of building something lasting seemed achievable. Robert Carter arrived in Phoenix in 1985 with $300, a beat-up Chevy truck, and the kind of determination that only comes from having nothing left to lose. He had grown up in rural Michigan, where his father worked the assembly line at a Ford plant, until the factory closed in 1982. Dad watched his own father spiral into depression and alcoholism after losing the only job he'd ever known. That experience taught him never to depend on someone else for his livelihood. Mom, Sarah Carter, was working as a secretary at a real estate office when they met. She had moved to Phoenix from Ohio, chasing better weather and opportunities that didn't exist in her economically depressed hometown. What drew them together was a shared understanding of financial insecurity and a fierce determination to build something better for their future children. Dad's first construction job was with Morrison Building Company, where he learned everything from foundation work to finish carpentry. He worked 12-hour days in the Arizona heat, saving every penny he could while Mom kept the books for his side jobs, weekend projects fixing porches, building decks, and renovating kitchens. By 1987, they had saved enough to buy Dad's first piece of professional equipment, a small excavator that he purchased from a company going out of business. Carter Construction officially began with a business license, liability insurance, and a single commercial contract to build a small medical office in Tempe. Marcus was born in 1985, right before Dad started the company. As the oldest child, he grew up watching our parents sacrifice everything for the business. Mom would bring him to the office in a portable crib while she managed invoices and payroll. Dad would take him to job sites on weekends, teaching him to recognize quality workmanship versus shortcuts. Caroline came along in 1988, 3 years after Marcus. From an early age, she showed an analytical mind and natural leadership qualities. While Marcus was content to follow Dad around construction sites, Caroline preferred helping Mom with the business paperwork. She could spot errors in invoices before she could properly tie her shoes. David was born in 1990, during Carter Construction's first major growth phase. Dad had just landed a contract to build a new elementary school, the kind of project that would establish the company's reputation for municipal work. David grew up during the boom years, when success seemed inevitable and money was less of a daily concern. Then came me in 1992. By this time, Carter Construction was well established with a full crew of experienced workers and a steady pipeline of projects. While my siblings remembered the struggle years, I only knew the company as a successful family business. The differences in our upbringing created different relationships with both the business and with money itself. Marcus and Caroline remembered lean years when Dad would come home exhausted, covered in dust, worried about making payroll. They developed a deep respect for financial security, but also an underlying anxiety about losing what we had built. David and I grew up during the prosperous years. We knew Dad worked hard, but we didn't experience the same fear about the business failing. This created a fundamental difference in how we viewed risk and success. Dad was intentional about involving all of us in the business as we grew up, Summer jobs weren't optional in the Carter household. By age 14, we were all expected to spend our breaks working for the company in some capacity. Marcus excelled at the administrative side. He could track project timelines, calculate material costs, and understand profit margins better than workers with decades of experience. But he never developed comfort with the physical demands of construction work. Hot summers on job sites left him drained and frustrated. Caroline gravitated toward the legal and regulatory aspects. She learned building codes, permit requirements, and contract language. Even as a teenager, she could spot problems in agreements that might cause issues months later. Her attention to detail was remarkable, though she could be inflexible when others didn't meet her standards. David discovered his talent for client relationships. He was naturally charismatic and could explain complex construction processes in terms that customers understood. Property developers and municipal officials liked working with him because he made their jobs easier. I found my calling in the actual construction work. While my siblings preferred air-conditioned offices, I loved being on job sites. Learning how buildings came together from foundation to roof felt like solving puzzles that mattered. Dad noticed my genuine interest and began teaching me advanced skills that went beyond basic summer job responsibilities. The company grew steadily throughout the 1990s and early 2000s. We specialized in commercial projects that required precision and reliability: schools, hospitals, government buildings, and office complexes. Dad built a reputation for completing projects on time and within budget. Even when unexpected challenges arose, our family dinners often centered around business discussions. Dad would describe problems he was facing on current projects, and we would all contribute ideas for solutions. Marcus might suggest budget adjustments. Caroline would identify potential legal issues. David would consider client satisfaction angles, and I would propose construction alternatives. These conversations taught us to think collectively about problems while developing our individual strengths. Dad was creating a leadership team that could eventually take over different aspects of the business. The plan was always for the four of us to inherit equal shares of Carter Construction. Dad believed that combining our different skills would make the company stronger than any of us could make it individually. Marcus would handle finances and strategic planning. Caroline would manage legal affairs and contracts. David would oversee sales and client relationships, and I would supervise actual construction operations. Throughout high school and college, this seemed like a natural progression. We each pursued education that would prepare us for our anticipated roles. Marcus earned an MBA from Arizona State University with a focus on corporate finance. Caroline went to law school at the University of Arizona and specialized in business law. David studied marketing and communications while developing his natural sales abilities. I chose civil engineering because I wanted to understand the technical side of construction at the highest level. While my siblings were learning to manage the business, I was learning to build better buildings. The family dynamic worked well through our 20s. Marcus joined the company full-time in 2007 and immediately began modernizing our financial systems. Caroline established our in-house legal department in 2010, reducing our dependence on outside attorneys. David's sales efforts helped us expand into new markets and larger projects. When I graduated and joined the company in 2014, Carter Construction was at its peak. We employed 47 people, maintained steady contracts worth over $20 million annually, and had established relationships with major clients throughout Arizona. Dad achieved his dream of building something lasting that would provide security for multiple generations of our family. The business was profitable, respected, and positioned for continued growth. But success also bred complacency, especially among my siblings. Marcus began viewing the company more as a financial asset than as an ongoing operation. Caroline started treating clients as legal risks to be managed rather than relationships to be nurtured. David focused on maximizing short-term sales commissions rather than building long-term partnerships. I noticed these shifts but didn't initially recognize them as warning signs. Marcus's cost-cutting measures seemed reasonable during slower periods. Caroline's increased focus on contracts and liability protection appeared prudent as the construction industry became more litigious. David's aggressive sales tactics brought in revenue during competitive bidding situations. What I failed to understand was that my siblings had begun viewing Carter Construction differently than Dad and I did. For us, the company was a legacy to be preserved and improved. For them, it had become an asset to be optimized and eventually monetized. The first crack in our family unity appeared during a strategic planning meeting in late 2018. Dad was approaching 70 and beginning to discuss succession planning more seriously. He proposed creating a formal leadership structure with each of us taking defined roles while maintaining equal ownership. Marcus immediately suggested that leadership positions should reflect actual business contributions rather than family birth order. Caroline supported this, arguing that equal ownership didn't necessarily mean equal management authority. David agreed, noting that different roles required different levels of responsibility and compensation. I defended Dad's original plan, arguing that our different strengths were meant to complement each other rather than compete. The business had succeeded because we each contributed unique value, not because any one of us was more important than the others. This disagreement revealed fundamental differences in how we viewed both the business and our family relationships. My siblings had begun thinking like corporate executives, focused on maximizing individual returns. I still thought like a family member committed to collective success. Dad tried to mediate these tensions, but the stress was clearly affecting his health. The long hours he had worked for 30 years were catching up with him. His doctor had warned about high blood pressure and recommended reducing his involvement in day-to-day operations. None of us wanted to see Dad's health deteriorate, but we disagreed about what changes were necessary. My siblings pushed for him to step back immediately and allow them to implement their modernization plans. I believed he should remain involved while gradually transitioning specific responsibilities. The heart attack in January 2021 forced the issue. Dad's recovery required complete rest and elimination of work-related stress. Suddenly, the succession planning that we had been discussing, theoretically, became an immediate practical necessity. That's when I discovered that my siblings had been planning their takeover much longer than I had realized. The first sign that something had fundamentally changed came 3 weeks after Dad's heart attack. I was reviewing project schedules in my office when Marcus walked in without knocking, something he had never done before. He carried a leather portfolio and had the kind of serious expression that usually meant bad news for someone. "We need to talk about restructuring," he said, settling into the chair across from my desk without being invited to sit. "Caroline and David are joining us in the conference room in 10 minutes. "Restructuring what?" I asked, though something in his tone already told me I wasn't going to like the answer. "The company's operational hierarchy. Dad's condition means we need clear decision-making authority while he recovers." I followed him to the conference room, where Caroline was already spreading documents across the table. David sat at the far end, his usually friendly demeanor replaced by something more businesslike and distant. "Before we start," Caroline said, "I want to make it clear that everything we're discussing today is in the company's best interests, and Dad's. We've all been thinking about this independently and reached the same conclusions." That phrase, "thinking about this independently," should have been my first clue that they had actually been planning together. But I was still operating under the assumption that we were a family working through a crisis, not opponents positioning for advantage. Marcus opened his portfolio and pulled out a typed proposal. "We've identified several operational inefficiencies that are costing the company significant money. With Dad unable to provide oversight, we need to implement changes immediately." The proposal was 12 pages long and covered everything from vendor relationships to employee management. As I read through it, I realized that every change would reduce my authority while expanding theirs. They wanted to centralize all financial decisions through Marcus, require my approval for any contracts over $50,000 through Caroline, and mandate that all client communications be coordinated through David. Essentially, I would need permission from my siblings to do the job I had been doing successfully for 7 years. "This completely undermines the construction management role," I said, looking up from the document. How am I supposed to manage projects if I can't make basic operational decisions? You'll still handle the technical aspects, David assured me, but the business side needs professional oversight. You're great with blueprints and construction schedules, but you don't have the business training for higher-level decisions, Caroline added. We're not questioning your construction expertise, Jessica. We're just acknowledging that running a multi-million-dollar company requires specialized skills in finance, law, and client management. The condescension in their voices was unmistakable. They were treating me like a skilled technician rather than an equal partner in the family business. Dad never needed permission from anyone to make operational decisions, I pointed out. Dad built this company over 30 years, Marcus replied. He earned the authority to make unilateral decisions. The rest of us need to work within defined roles and responsibilities. I realized then that they weren't just proposing temporary changes during Dad's recovery. They were attempting to permanently restructure the company's power dynamics with themselves in control and me in a subordinate position. I'm not signing this, I said, pushing the document back across the table. Caroline's expression hardened. We hoped you would be reasonable about this. The three of us have already agreed to these changes. We can implement them with a majority vote. What about Dad? He still owns 51% of the company. Dad's shares are held in trust while he's incapacitated, Marcus explained. The trust documents designate me as the temporary decision-maker for his interests. This was news to me. I had never seen any trust documents, and Dad had never mentioned such an arrangement. When was this trust created? I asked. 2 years ago, during the estate planning process, Caroline answered. Dad wanted to ensure the company could continue operating if anything happened to him. I left that meeting feeling like I had been ambushed. While I was focused on getting Dad the medical care he needed and keeping our projects on schedule, my siblings had been maneuvering to seize control of the company. Over the following days, I tried to contact Dad's attorney to review the trust documents Caroline had mentioned. Michael Rodriguez had handled our family's legal affairs for over a decade and had always been straightforward with me, but when I called his office, his secretary told me that the trust documents were confidential and could only be discussed with the designated trustee. That would be Marcus, she explained. Mr. Rodriguez can meet with you if Marcus provides written authorization. I was effectively locked out of information about my own family's business arrangements. The changes my siblings had proposed were implemented within a week. Marcus began requiring detailed financial justifications for routine expenses like equipment maintenance and supply orders. Caroline started reviewing all subcontractor agreements, even for trades we had worked with for years. David took over communications with our biggest clients, claiming he needed to manage their expectations during Dad's absence. The first real conflict came during the Riverside Hospital project, a new cardiac care wing that was our largest contract of the year. We were in the middle of the foundation work when I discovered that the concrete supplier Marcus had chosen was delivering substandard materials. The concrete samples I tested showed lower strength ratings than our specifications required. Using this material would create structural problems that might not become apparent for years, but when they did, they could be catastrophic. I immediately contacted the supplier to discuss the issue and began sourcing replacement concrete from our usual vendor, Thompson Materials. It would cost an additional $30,000 and delay the project by 1 week, but it was necessary to meet building codes and our quality standards. When Marcus found out, he exploded. You can't authorize a $30,000 change without approval, he said, storming into my office while I was reviewing the corrected material specifications. I can't build a hospital wing with defective concrete, I replied. The foundation would never pass inspection. You should have brought this to me first. We could have negotiated with the supplier for better prices or found alternative solutions. Marcus, this isn't a negotiation. The concrete doesn't meet specifications. We either use proper materials or we don't build the project. Caroline appeared in my doorway, having apparently been summoned by Marcus. Jessica, you're creating legal liability for the company by making unilateral changes to approved contracts. I'm preventing legal liability by ensuring we meet building codes and safety standards. That's not your decision to make anymore, Caroline said firmly. All significant project modifications need to go through proper approval channels. David joined the conversation, completing what felt like a coordinated intervention. The client is already concerned about delays. If we tell them we need more time and money because of material issues, it makes us look incompetent. I stared at my 3 siblings, all of whom were prioritizing budget and schedule over the structural integrity of a hospital building. This wasn't just a disagreement about business procedures. It was a fundamental conflict about values and priorities. We're not using defective concrete in a hospital, I said with finality. If you want to override that decision, you'll need to find a new construction manager. The room went quiet. Marcus, Caroline, and David exchanged glances that confirmed what I was beginning to suspect. They had discussed this possibility and had contingency plans. Nobody wants you to quit, Jess, David said in the conciliatory tone he used with difficult clients. We just need better communication and coordination among all departments. But the damage was done. They had made it clear that they viewed my professional judgment as subordinate to their business preferences. More importantly, they were willing to compromise safety and quality to protect profit margins. I authorized the concrete replacement and informed the client about the delay, explaining that we had discovered material defects that required correction. To my surprise, the hospital's project manager thanked me for catching the problem and praised our commitment to quality over schedule. Most contractors would have just used whatever was delivered, he told me. This is why we prefer working with Carter Construction. When I shared this feedback with my siblings, their response was lukewarm at best. Marcus grumbled about the cost overrun. Caroline worried about setting precedents for future change orders. David seemed concerned that other clients might expect similar attention to detail. Their reactions told me everything I needed to know about their priorities. They were no longer thinking like craftsmen who took pride in building things correctly. They were thinking like executives who viewed construction projects as financial transactions to be optimized. The second major incident happened a month later during the Mesa Community College library renovation. Our electrical subcontractor, Jensen Electric, had been cutting corners on installation work. The wiring they were installing met minimum code requirements, but fell short of the higher standards we typically maintained. When I raised concerns about the electrical work, Marcus accused me of being a perfectionist who didn't understand cost control. Caroline suggested that I was creating problems where none existed. David worried that my complaints would damage our relationship with Jensen Electric, which had become one of our cheapest subcontractors. I had a choice to make. I could accept their authority and allow substandard work to continue, or I could escalate the conflict by going over their heads. I chose to call Dad. His voice was weak but clear when he answered the phone. "How are things going at the office?" he asked. "Dad, we need to talk about the electrical work on the Mesa College project." I explained the situation, including my siblings' resistance to addressing the quality issues. Dad listened quietly before responding. "What does your gut tell you about the electrical installation?" "It's not good enough. It meets code, but barely. In 5 years, they'll be dealing with repeated failures and safety issues." "Then fix it," Dad said simply. "Our reputation is worth more than the cost of doing things right the first time." When I relayed Dad's decision to my siblings, their reaction was swift and coordinated. Marcus called an emergency meeting for the next morning. Caroline arrived with a legal pad full of notes. David brought printed emails that I hadn't seen before. "We can't continue operating this way," Marcus began. "Jessica is undermining established procedures and creating financial liability for the company. She's also putting Dad in a position where he has to make business decisions despite doctors' orders to avoid work-related stress." Caroline added. David presented his printed emails, which showed correspondence with several clients who had allegedly expressed concerns about project delays and cost overruns. I had never seen these complaints before, and wondered if they were even real. "The 3 of us have discussed this extensively," Marcus continued, "and we believe it's time to formalize a temporary management structure that doesn't require Jessica's involvement in day-to-day operations." They were effectively firing me from managing the company I had helped build, using procedures they had created specifically to override my authority. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. If they wanted to play politics, I would start documenting everything. If they wanted to question my competence, I would gather evidence of their incompetence. If they wanted to exclude me from decision-making, I would find out what decisions they were making without me. I began carrying a digital recorder to all meetings. I started copying financial documents and keeping detailed records of conversations. I created a secure email account that my siblings didn't know about and began documenting every suspicious transaction I could find. What I discovered over the following weeks shocked me. My siblings weren't just undermining my authority, they were systematically looting the company while positioning themselves to sell it for maximum personal gain. The war for Carter Construction had begun, but they didn't yet realize that I was fighting back. The war escalated quickly once my siblings realized I wasn't going to quietly accept their authority. What started as disagreements about business procedures transformed into a systematic campaign to force me out of Carter Construction entirely. They attacked from multiple directions simultaneously, and I began to understand that this had been planned long before Dad's heart attack. The first front was financial. Marcus implemented what he called enhanced fiscal oversight, which meant that every expense I requested required detailed justification and approval from all three siblings. Need new safety equipment for a job site? I had to submit a written proposal explaining why our existing equipment was inadequate. Want to hire temporary workers during busy periods? I needed to prove that our current crew couldn't handle the workload. These requirements didn't apply to expenses that Marcus, Caroline, or David initiated. Marcus could approve consultant fees for mysterious business development services. Caroline could authorize legal expenses for corporate restructuring analysis. David could spend thousands on client entertainment and marketing events. But I needed permission to buy basic construction supplies. The paperwork requirements became deliberately burdensome. A simple request to purchase lumber for the Phoenix Community Center project required a 14-page justification document, 3 cost comparisons from different suppliers, and a timeline analysis showing how the delay in purchasing materials would affect the project schedule. When I submitted these elaborate justifications, they would find reasons to request additional information or modifications. The approval process that had once taken a phone call now consumed days or weeks, creating exactly the delays and cost overruns they claimed to be preventing. Meanwhile, I discovered that my siblings were approving their own expenses through a streamlined process I wasn't allowed to use. Marcus had authorized a $50,000 payment to Southwest Business Consulting, a company I had never heard of. Caroline had approved legal fees to Blackstone and Associates, a firm that supposedly specialized in family business optimization. David had been paying Phoenix Marketing Solutions for client relationship enhancement services. When I asked for details about these expenses, I was told they were confidential strategic initiatives that didn't require my input since they weren't related to construction operations. The second front was operational sabotage, disguised as efficiency improvements. Caroline began requiring that all subcontractor agreements be reviewed by her before signing, even for trades we had worked with for years. This created bottlenecks that delayed project starts and frustrated our longtime partners. Thompson Materials, our concrete supplier for over 15 years, was told that their standard contract needed to be updated to reflect current legal requirements. The review process stretched for 2 months, during which time we couldn't order concrete from them. We were forced to use Marcus's preferred supplier, whose materials I had already identified as substandard. Peterson Electrical, our most reliable electrical contractor, was informed that their worker certification documentation needed to be verified through updated channels. This was despite the fact that we had copies of all relevant certifications in our files. The verification process conveniently took long enough that we had to use Jensen Electric for the Mesa College project. I began to see the pattern. Every delay forced us to use cheaper, less reliable subcontractors, who happened to be companies that my siblings had recently discovered. These new vendors offered lower bids, but delivered inferior work that created long-term problems and additional costs. The third front was professional isolation. David began excluding me from client meetings, claiming that technical details could be handled separately from business discussions. This meant I was no longer present when clients expressed concerns or made requests for project modifications. Instead, David would relay information to me, secondhand, often with crucial details missing or misrepresented. A client's request for upgraded materials would be presented as a demand for cost reductions. Concerns about project timeline would be translated as complaints about my management abilities. Caroline started handling all legal and regulatory communications without my input. When building inspectors had questions about our work, they were directed to contact her instead of me. This created a buffer that prevented me from building direct relationships with the officials who could verify the quality of our work. Marcus took control of all financial reporting, both internal and external. The project profitability reports I received no longer matched the detailed cost tracking I maintained independently. According to Marcus's reports, every project I managed was over budget and behind schedule. According to my records, we were meeting or exceeding our financial targets on most jobs. The discrepancies were significant enough that I began to suspect Marcus was manipulating the financial data to create a paper trail showing my incompetence. The fourth front was reputation assassination within the construction community. Word began spreading that Carter Construction was experiencing internal management issues that were affecting project quality and customer satisfaction. Competitors started using these rumors to underbid us on new projects. I learned about this when Tom Harrison from Harrison Development called me directly. Tom had been a client for over 8 years and was one of our most reliable sources of repeat business. "Jessica, what's going on over there?" he asked during a call that was supposedly about scheduling a new project. "I'm hearing stories that your family is fighting and it's affecting job sites." "What kind of stories?" I asked, though I suspected I knew the source. "That you're making demands that are driving up costs and creating delays. That your brothers and sister are trying to keep projects on track while you're being difficult about every decision." This was almost exactly the opposite of reality. I was the one fighting to maintain quality standards while my siblings prioritized cost-cutting over everything else. "Tom, you've worked with me for years. Have you ever experienced quality problems or unreasonable demands from me?" "No," he admitted. "That's why I'm calling you directly instead of going through David. I wanted to hear your side before making any decisions about future projects." I realized that my siblings were actively damaging my professional reputation to support their narrative that I was the problem. They were using our family conflict as a weapon against my career prospects. The fifth front was legal intimidation. Caroline began sending me formal legal notices for minor operational decisions, claiming I was violating company policies or exceeding my authority. These notices were copied to Dad, creating additional stress for him during his recovery. One notice accused me of unauthorized vendor communications because I had called Thompson Materials to discuss delivery schedules. Another claimed I had violated procurement procedures by ordering safety equipment without the required approvals. A third threatened disciplinary action for insubordination after I refused to use defective materials on the hospital project. These legal notices served multiple purposes. They created a paper trail suggesting I was a problematic employee who disregarded company policies. They demonstrated Caroline's authority to discipline me, and they put Dad in the position of having to choose between supporting me or avoiding conflict during his recovery. The combined pressure from all 5 fronts was exhausting and demoralizing. I was spending more time defending my decisions than actually managing construction projects. Every day brought new obstacles and restrictions that made it harder to do my job effectively. But the documentation I was secretly gathering revealed that my siblings' campaign against me was just the beginning of their plan. The real goal wasn't to control my behavior, it was to force me out entirely so they could sell Carter Construction to the highest bidder. I discovered this through a series of emails I found on Caroline's computer during a late evening when I was supposedly doing paperwork. She had left her email open, and I could see correspondence with Pacific Northwest Construction, one of the largest commercial builders in the region. The emails discussed a potential acquisition of Carter Construction, with Pacific Northwest paying approximately $15 million for the company's assets. contracts, and client relationships. The deal would eliminate most of our current employees and fold our operations into Pacific Northwest's Arizona division. Caroline had been providing Pacific Northwest with detailed financial information about our company, including confidential data about profit margins, client contracts, and employee costs. The most recent email included a timeline showing that the acquisition could be completed within 6 months if internal obstacles were removed. I was the primary internal obstacle. The emails also revealed that Marcus had been preparing financial projections that would maximize the sale price by showing artificially high profit margins. He was accomplishing this by cutting costs wherever possible, deferring maintenance expenses, and using cheaper materials that would create problems after the sale was completed. David's role was to maintain client relationships during the transition while gradually shifting them toward accepting lower service standards. His job was to normalize the cost-cutting measures so that Pacific Northwest could continue them without losing customers. My role, according to their plan, was to be eliminated as soon as possible. The documentation Caroline had been creating was designed to support a legal case that I was incompetent and needed to be removed from the company for its own protection. Once I was gone, they could complete the cost-cutting measures, finalize the sale to Pacific Northwest, and split the proceeds among themselves. Dad would receive his share, but he would also lose the company he had spent 35 years building. The most chilling part of their correspondence was how casually they discussed destroying Dad's legacy. Pacific Northwest had no interest in maintaining Carter Construction's reputation for quality work or its relationships with longtime employees. They wanted our client list and our project pipeline, nothing more. Our employees, many of whom had worked for Dad for over a decade, would be laid off and replaced with Pacific Northwest's lower-paid workers. Our subcontractors would be replaced with Pacific Northwest's preferred vendors. Our quality standards would be replaced with Pacific Northwest's cost optimization protocol. Everything that made Carter Construction special would disappear, but my siblings would walk away with millions of dollars in cash. Reading those emails felt like discovering that my own family had been planning to burn down our house with Dad still inside. The betrayal was complete and calculating, motivated by pure greed disguised as business strategy. That night, I made copies of every document I could find and began building the case that would eventually bring federal agents into that Phoenix courtroom. But first, I had to survive their final assault on my position in the company. The final assault came on a scorching Tuesday morning in July, exactly 18 months after Dad's heart attack. I arrived at the office to find 3 unfamiliar cars in the parking lot and strangers walking through our building with clipboards and measuring tapes. Marcus was leading them around like a real estate agent, showing property to potential buyers. When I confronted him in the hallway, he didn't even try to hide what was happening. Pacific Northwest is conducting their final due diligence assessment, he said matter-of-factly. The sale should close within 60 days. What sale? I demanded, though I already knew the answer. The sale of Carter Construction to Pacific Northwest Commercial Builders. We finalized the terms last week. You can't sell the company without my consent. I own 25%. Marcus smiled with the kind of condescension I had grown to hate. Actually, we can. Your shares have been frozen pending resolution of competency proceedings. The words hit me like a physical blow. What competency proceedings? Caroline appeared from Dad's old office, carrying a thick legal folder. Jessica, we need to talk in the conference room. There are some documents you need to see. The conference room felt like a courtroom where I was the defendant. Caroline, Marcus, and David sat on one side of the table while I faced them alone. The legal folder contained a petition to have me declared mentally incompetent to manage my business interests. The petition was 47 pages of carefully crafted lies and twisted facts. It claimed I suffered from delusional thinking patterns that caused me to make irrational business decisions based on paranoid suspicions about family members. It cited my obsessive documentation of routine business activities as evidence of compulsive behavior indicating psychological instability. Every disagreement we'd had about quality standards was reframed as evidence of my inability to think rationally about cost-benefit analysis. My insistence on using proper materials was characterized as inflexible perfectionism that disregards financial reality. My concerns about their business practices were described as paranoid delusions about family members engaging in criminal activity. The petition included sworn statements from employees claiming I had been erratic and difficult to work with. It contained psychological evaluations from a doctor I had never met. It featured financial analyses showing that every project I managed lost money due to my poor judgment and impractical demands. Most devastating were the recorded conversations included as evidence. My siblings had been secretly recording our arguments and editing them to remove context that would explain my positions. What remained were fragments of heated exchanges where I sounded angry and unreasonable. "This is completely fabricated," I said, looking up from the documents. "This is a legal proceeding based on documented evidence," Caroline replied coolly. "A judge will make the final determination about your competency, but in the meantime, your business interests are protected through a court-appointed conservator." "Who's the conservator?" "Marcus," David answered. "The court felt he was best qualified to manage your shares while the competency evaluation is completed." I realized then that they had orchestrated this entire scenario months in advance. The operational restrictions they had imposed weren't just about control, they were creating evidence for the competency petition. The financial reports showing my projects losing money weren't accidents, they were deliberate manipulations designed to support their case. The psychological evaluation had been conducted by Dr. Amanda Foster, a psychiatrist who specialized in business-related mental health assessments. According to her report, I exhibited classic symptoms of paranoid personality disorder with obsessive-compulsive features that significantly impair business judgment. Dr. Foster had based this diagnosis entirely on information provided by my siblings, without ever meeting me or conducting any direct evaluation. Her report cited my compulsive documentation of normal business activities and my delusional beliefs about family members engaging in fraudulent behavior as primary evidence of mental illness. The employee statements were equally damaging. Workers I had considered loyal described me as unpredictable and difficult to work with. Foreman claimed I gave confusing instructions and changed project specifications without explanation. Administrative staff reported that I was suspicious of routine business activities and accusatory toward family members. I recognized these descriptions as twisted versions of legitimate concerns I had raised. My confusing instructions were attempts to fix problems created by substandard materials. My changes to project specifications were corrections needed to meet building codes. My suspicious behavior was an investigation of financial irregularities. But presented without context, these statements painted a picture of someone who was unfit to manage anything, let alone a multi-million-dollar construction company. "The competency hearing is scheduled for next month," Caroline continued. "Until then, you're prohibited from making any business decisions or accessing company financial records." "What about Dad? Does he know about this?" Marcus and Caroline exchanged glances before Marcus answered. "Dad's health has deteriorated. His doctor recommended that he not be involved in stressful business decisions. I want to see him." "That's not advisable right now," David said gently. "He's been very upset about the family conflicts. We think it's better if he focuses on his recovery without additional stress." They were isolating me from Dad the same way they had isolated me from clients, employees, and business operations. I was being systematically cut off from every source of support and information. That evening, I drove to Dad's house and found it empty. A neighbor told me that he had been moved to a private care facility the previous week. When I called the facility, they informed me that Robert Carter was not accepting visitors except for immediate family members on an approved list. My name was not on the list. I realized that my siblings had effectively kidnapped Dad by convincing him that seeing me would be harmful to his health. They had isolated him from anyone who might tell him the truth about what they were doing to the company. The next morning, I returned to the office to find that my access card no longer worked. When I knocked on the door, a security guard I didn't recognize informed me that I was not authorized to enter the building. "This is my office," I told him. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but my instructions are clear. You're not on the approved access list. Through the glass doors, I could see my siblings meeting with the Pacific Northwest executives, finalizing the details of the sale that would destroy everything Dad had built. I drove home to my apartment and sat in my car for 20 minutes, trying to process what had just happened. In less than 24 hours, I had lost access to my job, my office, my father, and my ownership stake in the family business. The competency petition meant I couldn't even hire an attorney without court approval. My siblings had executed a perfect legal coup, using the mental health system and conservatorship laws to neutralize me while they completed their theft. But they had made one crucial mistake. In their rush to eliminate me, they had focused entirely on legal maneuvering while ignoring the evidence I had been gathering for over a year. That evening, I sat in my apartment, surrounded by boxes of documents, audio recordings, photographs, and financial records that proved every aspect of their criminal conspiracy. The competency petition claimed I was paranoid and delusional about their fraudulent activities. The evidence I had collected proved that every suspicion I had raised was accurate. The fake consulting companies, the inflated vendor payments, the kickback schemes, the deliberate use of substandard materials, everything was documented in meticulous detail. I had bank records showing money being transferred to personal accounts. I had audio recordings of them discussing illegal activities. I had emails proving they had been planning to sell the company long before Dad's heart attack. Most importantly, I had evidence that they had been systematically defrauding Medicare and other federal programs through false billing on government construction projects. The hospital and school projects they had cut corners on involved federal funding, making their actions federal crimes. The weight of what I was holding was staggering. This wasn't just evidence of civil fraud or family betrayal. This was proof of organized criminal activity that violated multiple federal statutes. But I was facing a competency hearing where they would argue that my collection of this evidence proved I was mentally ill. The same documentation that demonstrated their crimes would be presented as symptoms of my paranoid delusions. I spent 3 days organizing everything into a coherent narrative that would be impossible to dismiss or mischaracterize. Every document was cross-referenced with supporting evidence. Every audio recording was transcribed and verified. Every financial transaction was traced through multiple sources. When I finished, I had assembled a case that would send my siblings to federal prison for decades. The question was whether anyone would listen to me before they succeeded in having me declared incompetent. On Friday morning, I called the FBI field office in Phoenix and asked to speak with someone about federal crimes involving construction fraud and Medicare billing irregularities. The agent who took my call was polite, but skeptical. "Ma'am, these are serious allegations. Do you have documentation to support these claims?" "I have over 300 pages of financial records, dozens of audio recordings, and evidence of a conspiracy to defraud federal programs of more than $4 million. There was a pause before the agent responded. "Can you come in Monday morning? Bring everything you have." That weekend was the longest of my life. I spent it making backup copies of everything and preparing for the possibility that my siblings might try to have me arrested or committed before I could present my evidence. On Monday morning, I walked into the FBI field office carrying 2 large boxes and a briefcase full of the most damning evidence of corporate fraud I had ever seen. The agent who met with me was Special Agent Sarah Chen, a specialist in white-collar crime who had been investigating construction industry fraud for over a decade. She spent 4 hours reviewing my documentation before speaking. "Miss Carter, this is one of the most comprehensive fraud cases I've seen in 15 years. How long have you been gathering this evidence?" 18 months, I answered, "since I first suspected something was wrong." "Were you planning to be a whistleblower from the beginning?" "No," I admitted. "I was hoping I was wrong about my own family." Agent Chen closed the last folder and looked at me directly. "You realize that proceeding with this investigation will destroy your family relationships permanently." My family relationships were destroyed the moment they chose money over everything else we were supposed to stand for. "And you understand that you'll likely be the key witness in a federal prosecution that could send your siblings to prison for decades." I thought about Dad, alone in a care facility, believing that his children were protecting the company he had built with his own hands. I thought about the employees who would lose their jobs when Pacific Northwest gutted the company. I thought about the future hospital patients, whose safety would be compromised by the substandard construction my siblings had authorized. Yes, I said. I understand. Agent Chen nodded and picked up her phone. I'm calling for a warrant. We're going to need to move quickly before they complete the sale or destroy additional evidence. As she made the call, I realized that I had reached the point of no return. Within hours, federal agents would be raiding Carter Construction, arresting my siblings, and exposing the full scope of their criminal conspiracy. The darkest moment had passed. Now comes the reckoning. The competency hearing was scheduled for Thursday morning at 9 a.m. in Maricopa County Superior Court. I arrived early with my court-appointed attorney, Janet Mills, a public defender who had been assigned to represent me in the proceedings. She was competent but overwhelmed, handling dozens of cases simultaneously and clearly skeptical about my claims of family fraud. Jessica, I need you to understand the reality of this situation, she said as we sat in the courthouse hallway. Your siblings have presented compelling evidence that you've been exhibiting erratic behavior. The psychological evaluation supports their position. Unless you can provide concrete proof of their alleged criminal activities, this hearing isn't going to go well for you. I handed her a manila folder containing a summary of the evidence I had provided to the FBI. This is just a sample of what I have. Janet opened the folder and began reading. Her expression changed as she reviewed the financial documents and transaction records. Jessica, where did you get this information? I've been documenting everything for 18 months. There's much more than what's in that folder. This shows systematic fraud. Why didn't you tell me about this before? Because I didn't know if you would believe me. Everyone thinks I'm paranoid and delusional. Janet was still reading when Marcus, Caroline, and David arrived with their legal team, led by Robert Blackstone, one of Phoenix's most expensive attorneys. They walked past us without acknowledgement, projecting the confidence of people who believed victory was inevitable. Judge Patricia Morrison entered the courtroom precisely at 9 a.m. She was in her early 60s with silver hair and the kind of stern expression that suggested she had seen every possible form of legal manipulation during her career. This court will hear the petition regarding the mental competency of Jessica Carter to manage her business affairs. Judge Morrison announced, Mr. Blackstone, you may proceed with your case. Blackstone's presentation was masterful. He methodically walked through the evidence of my alleged mental instability, presenting each piece as part of a clear pattern of deteriorating judgment and paranoid thinking. Dr. Amanda Foster testified via video conference about my textbook symptoms of paranoid personality disorder. She explained how my obsessive documentation and delusional beliefs about family fraud indicated serious psychological impairment. Marcus testified about my increasingly erratic behavior and inability to make rational business decisions. He presented financial reports showing that every project I managed had lost money due to my unrealistic quality demands. Caroline described my hostile and accusatory attitude toward family members and my refusal to accept proper business procedures. She submitted the legal notices she had sent me as evidence of my continued insubordination and disregard for company policies. David testified about client complaints regarding my unprofessional behavior and unreasonable project demands. He presented emails from supposedly dissatisfied customers who wanted me removed from their projects. The case they built was convincing and comprehensive. Without context, my behavior appeared exactly as they described it: paranoid, obsessive, and destructive to business operations. Janet did her best to cross-examine their witnesses, but she was clearly outmatched by Blackstone's preparation and resources. When Judge Morrison asked if I had any evidence to present in my defense, Janet requested a brief recess to confer with her client. Jessica, do you have the complete documentation you mentioned? She asked urgently. This is our only chance. I have some of it with me, I said, opening my briefcase. But the FBI has most of the evidence. The FBI? What are you talking about? I filed a federal complaint on Monday. They're investigating my siblings for fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. Janet stared at me. You didn't think to mention this earlier. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text message from Agent Chen. Search warrants executed. Multiple arrests made. Need you to confirm evidence in the courtroom if possible. I showed the message to Janet, whose eyes widened. Judge Morrison needs to see this immediately. When court reconvened, Janet addressed the judge. Your Honor, my client has information that directly contradicts the allegations made by petitioners. We request permission to present additional evidence that has just become available. Blackstone objected. Your Honor, this appears to be a desperate attempt to introduce irrelevant material to delay proceedings. Judge Morrison studied Janet's request. What type of evidence are you referring to? Ms. Mills, evidence of criminal fraud and embezzlement by the petitioners, Your Honor. Federal authorities have just executed search warrants based on my client's complaint. The courtroom erupted. Marcus, Caroline, and David were whispering frantically to Blackstone, who looked genuinely shocked. Judge Morrison banged her gavel for order. Ms. Mills approached the bench with Mr. Blackstone. After a brief conference, Judge Morrison returned to her seat. This court will take a 30-minute recess while I review the situation. No one is to leave the courtroom. During the recess, Agent Chen arrived with 2 other FBI agents and a prosecutor from the U.S. Attorney's Office. She approached me in the hallway. Ms. Carter, we've arrested Marcus Carter, Caroline Henderson, and David Carter on federal charges of conspiracy, fraud, and embezzlement. We've also arrested Bradley Henderson, Patricia Stevens from Southwest Business Consulting, and Michael Rodriguez from Blackstone and Associates for their roles in the conspiracy. I looked through the courtroom windows and saw my siblings in handcuffs being led away by federal agents. Caroline was crying. Marcus appeared to be arguing with the arresting officer. David looked completely defeated. What about the competency hearing? I asked. That's up to the judge, but I suspect these proceedings will be dismissed, given the circumstances. When court reconvened, Judge Morrison addressed the nearly empty courtroom. Most of the petitioners and their witnesses were no longer available to continue the proceedings. Given the developments that have occurred during this hearing, and the arrest of the primary petitioners on federal charges related to the allegations they made against the respondent, this court finds insufficient evidence to support the competency petition. She looked directly at me. Ms. Carter, the petition against you is dismissed. Your business interests are restored to your full control immediately. The federal prosecution moved swiftly. The evidence I had gathered over 18 months provided prosecutors with an airtight case against my siblings and their co-conspirators. Marcus, Caroline, and David were each charged with multiple felonies, including conspiracy to commit fraud, embezzlement, money laundering, and filing false claims with federal programs. The investigation revealed that their criminal activities had been far more extensive than even I had realized. They had been systematically overbilling federal contracts for over 3 years, stealing more than $6 million from Medicare, Veterans Affairs, and Department of Education construction projects. Marcus had created an elaborate network of shell companies to launder stolen money. Caroline had used her legal knowledge to draft fraudulent contracts that concealed illegal activities. David had manipulated client relationships to facilitate the schemes, while maintaining plausible deniability. The conspiracy also included several outside accomplices. Dr. Amanda Foster had been paid to provide false psychological evaluations for multiple cases involving business disputes. Michael Rodriguez had been helping other families orchestrate similar competency challenges to steal family businesses. Bradley Henderson had been recruiting clients for the fraud network through his real estate connections. Pacific Northwest Construction was revealed to be a front operation designed specifically to purchase companies that had been artificially devalued through internal fraud. They had been working with Marcus and Caroline for over 2 years to identify and acquire family businesses across multiple states. The scope of the criminal enterprise was staggering. Federal investigators found evidence of similar schemes involving construction companies in California, Nevada, Colorado, and Texas. My siblings hadn't just been stealing from Carter Construction, they had been part of a multi-state organized crime network. Marcus, Caroline, and David eventually pleaded guilty to avoid longer sentences from a jury trial. Marcus received 12 years in federal prison. Caroline got 10 years. David was sentenced to 8 years. All three were ordered to pay complete restitution plus substantial fines. Dr. Foster lost her medical license and received 5 years in prison. Michael Rodriguez was disbarred and sentenced to 7 years. Bradley Henderson received 3 years and was required to surrender his real estate license. Pacific Northwest Construction was shut down, and its executives faced their own federal charges in multiple jurisdictions. The recovery process for Carter Construction was complex but ultimately successful. Federal authorities froze all company assets during the investigation, but once the criminal case was resolved, I regained full control of the business. The damage my siblings had inflicted was extensive. They had depleted cash reserves, damaged relationships with longtime subcontractors, and compromised our reputation in the construction community. Several major clients had canceled contracts during the legal proceedings, creating immediate financial challenges. But the company's core strengths remained intact. Our skilled employees had stayed loyal throughout the crisis. Our reputation for quality work, though damaged, could be rebuilt through consistent performance. Most importantly, the relationships Dad had cultivated over 35 years provided a foundation for recovery. The first priority was restoring operational standards. I immediately terminated relationships with all the substandard vendors my siblings had been using and rebuilt partnerships with our traditional suppliers. Thompson Materials welcomed us back, as did Peterson Electrical and most of our other longtime partners. The second priority was financial stability. The restitution payments from my siblings' criminal convictions helped restore company cash flow, but full recovery required several years of careful management. I implemented conservative fiscal policies while gradually rebuilding our project pipeline. The third priority was rebuilding trust with clients and the construction community. This required complete transparency about what had happened and demonstrable changes in how we operated. I hired an independent auditing firm to review all our financial procedures and began publishing annual transparency reports showing our compliance with all federal regulations. Dad's recovery paralleled the company's rehabilitation. Once he learned the truth about what my siblings had done, his health improved dramatically. The stress of family conflict had been more damaging to his condition than the physical demands of work. I should have seen what they were doing, he told me during one of our weekly dinners after his return home. I taught them about business, but I failed to teach them about character. You taught them the same values you taught me, I replied. They chose to ignore those lessons. Dad sold his shares to me at a fair market price, allowing him to enjoy retirement without the stress of business ownership, while ensuring Carter Construction remained a family company, committed to quality and integrity. The experience transformed my understanding of family, business, and personal responsibility. I learned that blood relationships don't guarantee loyalty, that success can corrupt people in unexpected ways, and that sometimes doing the right thing requires destroying the very relationships you're trying to protect. But I also learned that integrity creates its own rewards. The employees who stayed with Carter Construction during the crisis became the foundation of a stronger company culture. The clients who remained loyal during the legal proceedings became our most trusted long-term partners. The industry relationships that survived the scandal became deeper and more meaningful. 5 years later, Carter Construction employs 68 people and generates over $30 million in annual revenue. We specialize in projects that matter: schools, hospitals, community centers, and municipal buildings that serve the public good. We've implemented comprehensive ethics training for all employees and maintain strict compliance procedures that exceed federal requirements. Every project we complete includes a quality guarantee that reflects our commitment to building things that will last. The Jessica Carter Foundation, which I established using funds recovered from the criminal prosecution, provides scholarships for construction industry education and supports programs that help families dealing with elder abuse and financial exploitation. My siblings and I have no relationship. They made their choices, and I made mine. Marcus, Caroline, and David are currently serving their federal sentences at different facilities across the country. I don't visit them, and they don't contact me. Sometimes people ask if I regret exposing my own family to federal prosecution. The answer is no. They weren't acting like family when they chose greed over everything else we were supposed to stand for. Real family means protecting each other, supporting each other's success, and working together toward common goals. Real family means choosing principles over profit, integrity over easy money, and truth over convenient lies. My siblings demanded everything from Carter Construction, and from me, they wanted money, control, and the right to destroy what Dad had built for their own benefit. What they got instead was federal prison sentences and the complete loss of everything they had tried to steal. Sometimes justice takes time, but it's worth the wait. The file I handed to Judge Morrison that day contained more than evidence of criminal fraud. It contained proof that choosing the right thing over the easy thing always has consequences for everyone involved. In this case, those consequences included 4 FBI agents walking into a courtroom and changing my family forever. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.